The sand burned under Fiona Barrett's knees as she pushed her fingers into the cracked earth, knowing most people would call her foolish for trying to grow anything in this God-forsaken stretch of Arizona territory. It was 1883, and the desert outside Trinity seemed determined to swallow everything living, but Fiona had other plans. She had arrived 3 weeks ago on the stagecoach from Kansas, fleeing a life that had crumbled around her like sun-baked clay. Her father had died of consumption, her mother 2 years before that, and the small farm they had worked had been claimed by the bank. At 22 years old, she had nothing but a carpetbag of clothes, her mother's seed collection, and a stubborn determination that had kept the Barrett family going through worse times. Well, perhaps not worse than this heat. Fiona wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. The boarding house where she had taken a room sat a quarter-mile behind her, run by a kind widow named Mrs. Chen, who had come west with the railroad workers and stayed when her husband died in a tunnel collapse. The woman had looked at Fiona with understanding eyes when she had explained her situation, offering her a reduced rate in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning. But Fiona needed more than shelter. She needed purpose. She needed to create something that would root her to this harsh land, prove that beauty could exist even in the most unforgiving places. So she had walked out into the desert with her mother's seeds, found a spot where an ancient dried creek bed suggested water had once run, and started digging. The wildflower seeds went in first, varieties her mother had collected over the years. Black-eyed Susans, desert marigolds, California poppies, lupines. Then vegetables, practical and necessary. Tomatoes, beans, squash. Fiona knew it was nearly impossible, knew the odds were stacked against her like cards in a crooked game, but she had to try. She had just finished patting down the earth over the last seed when a shadow fell across her work. Fiona looked up, shading her eyes against the brutal afternoon sun, and saw a man on horseback watching her with an expression somewhere between curiosity and concern. "That dirt is not going to be kind to those seeds," he said, his voice carrying a rough edge softened by something that might have been gentleness. "You are going to need water, lots of it." Fiona stood, brushing the dust from her worn calico skirt. The man was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wore the typical attire of a ranch hand, his hat battered and his boots scuffed, but he sat his horse with an easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable in this harsh landscape. "I am aware of that," Fiona said, lifting her chin. "I plan to carry water from the boarding house well." The cowboy dismounted, and she noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "That is half a mile round trip. You will kill yourself before you save a single seed." He walked closer, studying the disturbed earth where she had been working. "You picked a spot where water used to run, though. That is smart. Ground might hold moisture deeper down." "I appreciate your assessment," Fiona said, not bothering to hide the tartness in her tone. She had heard enough men tell her what she could and could not do to last a lifetime. But the cowboy just smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I am Dalton Quinn. I work at the Double R Ranch about 3 miles north of here. We have a spring on the property." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I could bring you water. Enough to give your garden a fighting chance." Fiona studied him suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" Dalton looked out at the desert, at the endless expanse of sand and scrub brush and heat shimmer. "I have been working this land for 7 years, since I was 19 and stupid enough to think I could make something of myself out here. You know what I have learned? That anything brave enough to try growing in this place deserves a chance." He met her eyes. even if the odds are not good. Something in his words, in the honest simplicity of them, made Fiona's defensive wall crack just slightly. "I am Fiona Barrett, and I would be grateful for the water, Mr. Quinn. Dalton is fine." He tipped his hat. "I will bring barrels tomorrow morning before the heat gets too bad." True to his word, Dalton arrived the next morning as the sun was just painting the eastern sky pink and gold. He came with a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, 4 large barrels sloshing in the back. Fiona had been awake for an hour already, unable to sleep for thinking about the seeds beneath the hard, packed earth, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. "Good morning, Miss Barrett," Dalton called as he pulled the wagon to a stop near her plot. "Fiona, please." She walked over, eyeing the barrels. "That is a lot of water. This desert drinks deep," he said, jumping down from the wagon seat. He winced slightly when he landed, and Fiona found herself curious about the injury that caused his limp, but too polite to ask. "We need to soak the ground thoroughly, give the seeds enough moisture to germinate. Then we water every day until they are established." Fiona raised an eyebrow. Dalton had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I mean, I can bring the water. What you do with it is your business." But he did not leave after unloading the barrels. Instead, he helped Fiona carry bucket after bucket to her garden plot, showing her how to water slowly so the liquid would soak in rather than run off the sun-hardened surface. They worked in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, and Fiona found herself grateful for his presence, for the easy way he moved through this task, as if helping a strange woman water. The desert was a perfectly normal way to spend a morning. "You said you have been at the Double R for 7 years, Fiona said as they took a brief rest in the shade of the wagon. "Where are you from originally?" "Colorado," Dalton said, accepting the canteen of water she offered. "My family had a small ranch up in the mountains. Beautiful country, but my father had 4 sons and only land enough for one of them to make a living. I am the youngest, so I headed south to find my own way." "Do you miss it?" "Every day," he admitted. "But missing something and being able to go back are 2 different things. What about you?" "What brought you to Trinity?" Fiona told him about Kansas, about the farm and her parents and the bank. She found it surprisingly easy to talk to him, this cowboy with kind eyes who had stopped to help a stranger plant flowers in the desert. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "My mother died when I was 16, he said quietly. "Fever took her in the space of 3 days. My father followed 2 years later. I think his heart just gave out from missing her." He looked at Fiona's garden plot. She kept flowers. Nothing fancy, just wildflowers she would transplant from the meadows around our property. My father used to say they were the only thing that could make her smile in the winter when the snow was deep and the days were short. "Is that why you stopped?" Fiona asked. "When you saw me planting?" "Maybe." Dalton stood, stretching his back. "Or maybe I just recognized someone too stubborn to let a little thing like impossible odds stop them." Over the following weeks, Dalton came every morning with water. Sometimes he would stay and help her spread the moisture evenly across the plot. Other times he would leave the barrels and ride off to his work at the Double R, but he always came back the next day. Fiona found herself listening for the sound of his wagon, found her heart lifting when she saw him approach across the desert floor. The garden remained stubbornly bare for the first 2 weeks, and Fiona felt doubt creeping in. But on the 15th day, she arrived at dawn to find tiny green shoots pushing through the earth. She let out a cry of joy so loud, it startled a roadrunner from a nearby bush, and she sank to her knees to study the fragile miracle of growth. When Dalton arrived an hour later, he found her still there, tears streaming down her face. "They are growing," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Dalton, they are actually growing." He knelt beside her, his face breaking into a wide smile. "I will be damned. You did it, Fiona." "We did it," she corrected, reaching out to touch his arm without thinking. "I could not have done this without you." Their eyes met, and Fiona felt something shift between them, something that had been building with every morning visit, every shared task, every moment of quiet conversation. Dalton's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm, his calloused fingers warm and solid. "Fiona, I need to tell you something," he started, but the sound of hoofbeats interrupted him. They both stood as a rider approached, a young man Fiona recognized from town. "Dalton," he called. "Boss needs you back at the ranch right away. We got trouble with rustlers." Dalton's jaw tightened. "Tell him I am on my way." He turned back to Fiona as the rider galloped off. "I have to go. Will you be all right?" "Of course," Fiona said, even as worry tightened her chest. "Be careful." He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I will come back tomorrow, I promise." But Dalton did not come the next day, or the day after that. Fiona carried water herself from the boarding house well, making trip after back-breaking trip in the heat, her shoulders aching and her hands blistering. The seedlings continued to grow, demanding their daily drink, and she could not let them die now. On the third day, Mrs. Chen found her collapsed in the shade of the boarding house porch, too exhausted to make another trip. "That Quinn boy has not been around," the older woman observed, bringing Fiona a glass of cool water from the spring house. "He had trouble at his ranch," Fiona said, trying to keep her voice neutral even as fear gnawed at her. What if something had happened to him? What if the rustlers had been armed? "I am managing." "You are killing yourself," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "There is caring for something, and then there is breaking yourself for it. You need to find balance, girl." But Fiona could not stop. The garden had become more than just plants to her. It was proof that she could survive here, that she could create life in this harsh place. And it was connected to Dalton in a way she could not fully explain, as if every leaf and stem was woven through with the thread of their growing connection. On the fourth morning, she was hauling her second bucket of water when she heard the blessed sound of wagon wheels. Dalton pulled up, and Fiona nearly dropped the bucket in her relief. But her relief turned to concern when she saw him clearly. He had a bruise darkening his jaw and looked like he had not slept in days. "I am sorry," he said, climbing down stiffly from the wagon. "We had a real problem with the rustlers. They hit us 2 nights in a row, and we have been riding patrols." He noticed the blisters on her hands, the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Fiona, you should have let the garden go." "I could not do that," she said simply. Dalton stepped closer, gently taking her damaged hands in his. "You are bleeding. They are just blisters. They are more than that." He looked at her with something like awe. "You have been doing this alone for 4 days. The plants needed water." Fiona felt suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. It was not anything heroic. "It was to those plants," Dalton said softly, "and to me." He pulled her closer, and Fiona did not resist. "I thought about you every moment I was riding those patrols. Worried about you out here alone, hoped you were not trying to manage everything by yourself. I should have known you would be exactly this stubborn." "I learned from the best," Fiona said, managing a tired smile. Dalton laughed, then winced, his hand going to his ribs. Fiona's concern immediately sharpened. "You are hurt. Just bruised. One of the rustlers got in a lucky hit before we ran them off." He waved away her worry. "Let me take care of your hands, then we will water your garden." He had brought supplies in the wagon, and he insisted on cleaning and bandaging her blisters before they did anything else. His touch was gentle as he worked, his expression concentrated, and Fiona found herself studying his face. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she had never noticed before. "How did you get that scar?" she asked quietly. Dalton looked up, then touched his eyebrow. "This. My brother Jonathan and I were wrestling when we were kids. He was 12, I was 8. We crashed into a fence post and I split my head open. My mother was so angry she made us both help her with the washing for a month. You must miss them, your brothers." "I do." Dalton finished tying off the bandage on her second hand. "But I found something here I would not trade for all the family reunions in the world." "What is that?" He met her eyes. "You." Fiona's heart hammered in her chest. "Dalton, we have only known each other for a few weeks." "I know. And if that is too fast, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need." He stood, helping her to her feet. "But I need you to know that what I feel for you is not a passing fancy. From the moment I saw you on your knees in the dirt, trying to grow flowers in the desert, I have not been able to think about anything else." "I feel the same way," Fiona admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing someone else. Of caring too much and having it ripped away." She looked out at her garden, at the tiny green shoots that represented hope and heartbreak in equal measure. "Everything I have ever planted has eventually withered." "Not everything," Dalton said, gesturing to the thriving seedlings. "Those are growing strong, and you know why, because you did not give up on them. You brought them water even when it was hard, even when you were exhausted, even when I could not be here to help." He took her bandaged hand carefully. "That is not withering. That is blooming." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "My mother used to say that people are like plants. We need the right conditions to grow." "Then maybe we found the right conditions in each other," Dalton said. Before Fiona could respond, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, tasting of desert dust and hope, and Fiona felt something inside her that had been locked tight since her father's death finally open. She kissed him back, her bandaged hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid thump of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the second time I brought water." "You were laughing at something, I do not even remember what, and the sun caught your hair and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "Only the second time," Fiona teased, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I must have been losing my touch." Dalton laughed, then kissed her again, deeper this time. When they finally separated, he was grinning. "Come on, let us get your garden watered before the heat gets too bad. Then I need to take you into town." "Why?" "Because I am going to buy you proper gloves so you do not destroy your hands, and then I am taking you to dinner at the hotel restaurant." "Dalton Quinn, are you asking me to dinner?" "I am." He helped her up into the wagon. "And I hope you say yes, because I already told Mrs. Chen I was taking you, and she seemed real pleased about it." Fiona laughed, the sound carrying across the desert. "You told her before you told me. I had to make sure she would not have you working tonight." Dalton climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "She is a fearsome woman when she is disappointed." They watered the garden together, and Fiona marveled at how different the task felt now. Before, it had been work, necessary but solitary. Now, with Dalton beside her, it felt like partnership, like they were tending something that belonged to both of them. As they worked, Dalton told her more about the Double R Ranch, about his boss Mr. Richardson, who had taken a chance on a limping Colorado cowboy with no references. "He asked me one question during my interview. He said, 'Can you work hard even when things are difficult?' I told him I could, and he hired me on the spot." "Is that how you hurt your leg?" Fiona asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I am sorry, that is not my business." It is if you want it to be, Dalton said easily. And yes, I was breaking a horse about 5 years back and got thrown, landed wrong and broke my leg in 2 places. The doctor in Trinity did his best, but it did not set quite right. That is why I have the limp. Does it hurt? Sometimes, especially when the weather changes. But I manage. He looked at her. We all have scars, Fiona. Some are just more visible than others. She thought about her own scars, the invisible ones that marked her heart. My father used to say that scars are just proof we survived something difficult. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Fiona poured the last bucket of water. I wish you could have met him. I wish I could have too. They drove into Trinity after finishing the watering, and true to his word, Dalton took her to the general store and bought her a pair of leather gloves. The proprietor, Mr. Jameson, gave them a knowing smile as Dalton paid. You two make a handsome couple, the old man said. Good to see young folks finding happiness. Fiona felt her cheeks heat, but Dalton just thanked him and escorted her out with his hand on the small of her back, a possessive gesture that sent warmth through her entire body. Dinner at the hotel restaurant was the finest meal Fiona had eaten since coming to Trinity. Dalton ordered steak and potatoes, and they shared a bottle of wine that made her head pleasantly fuzzy. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Fiona realized she had never felt this comfortable with another person. Dalton listened when she spoke, really listened, and his responses showed he valued her thoughts and opinions. What do you want, Fiona? He asked as they lingered over coffee. Not what you think you should want, but what your heart desires. She considered the question carefully. I want a place that is mine. Not just a room I rent or a home I work to maintain, but land that belongs to me. I want to grow things, beautiful things and practical things. I want to prove that life can thrive even in harsh conditions. She paused. And I want someone to share it with, someone who understands why it matters. Dalton reached across the table and took her hand. I understand why it matters. I know you do. That is why I am terrified. Do not be, he said softly. I am not going anywhere. But life in the Arizona territory had a way of testing promises. 2 weeks later, Dalton arrived at the garden plot looking troubled. Fiona's flowers were now several inches tall, their leaves strong and green, and she had been imagining the riot of color they would provide once they bloomed. But Dalton's expression killed her good mood instantly. What is wrong? She asked, setting down her watering can. Mr. Richardson is selling the double R, Dalton said heavily. His brother back east is dying and he is moving back to care for him. The new owner takes possession next month. Fiona felt her stomach drop. What does that mean for you? I do not know yet. The new owner might keep the existing hands on, or he might bring his own crew. Dalton ran a hand through his hair. I am the youngest and the most recently hired. If he lets anyone go, it will probably be me. But you are good at your job. You have been there for 7 years. That does not always matter. He looked at the garden, at the thriving plants. Fiona, if I lose this job, I might have to leave Trinity, go find work somewhere else. The thought hit her like a physical blow. Leave? But they had just found each other. The garden was growing. She was growing. There must be other ranches around here that need hands. Not many, and most are not hiring. Jobs are scarce right now. He pulled her into his arms. I do not want to leave you, but I need to work, and if there is no work here, I will have no choice. Fiona pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, horse and leather and something uniquely Dalton. We will figure something out. I hope so, he said, but she could hear the doubt in his voice. The days that followed were bittersweet. Dalton continued bringing water every morning, and they continued growing closer, but the specter of his possible departure hung over everything. The new owner of the Double R, A man named Silas Hartford from Texas arrived to survey his purchase. Word around town was that he was harsh and particular, known for running a tight operation with little patience for what he saw as weakness. Fiona spent her days tending the garden and her evenings working at the boarding house. But her mind was always on Dalton. She found herself praying, something she had not done much since her father died, asking whatever power might be listening to let him stay. Her flowers finally began to bloom in early June, and the sight of them took her breath away. Bright yellow black-eyed Susans, cheerful orange marigolds, delicate purple lupines, and brilliant red poppies created a riot of color against the dull desert landscape. People from town began making the walk out to see them, marveling that such beauty could exist in such a harsh place. "It is like a miracle," Mrs. Chen said, standing with her hands clasped before her. "In all my years here, I have never seen anything like it." But the person Fiona most wanted to share the blooms with was Dalton, and he did not come that day, or the next. On the third day, she walked the 3 miles to the Double R Ranch herself, her heart pounding with worry. She found him in the stable, mucking out stalls. He looked up when she entered, and she saw immediately that something was wrong. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. "Hartford is bringing his own crew," he said without preamble. "We all have to be off the property by the end of the week." Fiona went to him, wrapping her arms around him despite the smell of horse and sweat. "I am so sorry. I have been asking around. There is nothing in Trinity or the surrounding area. I am going to have to head south, maybe find work near Tucson." He held her tightly. "I do not want to leave you, Fiona. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life." "Then do not leave," she said desperately. "Stay. We will figure something out together." "How? I cannot support myself, let alone a wife, without work." The word wife hung between them, unplanned but potent. Fiona pulled back to look at him. "Is that what you want, to marry me?" Dalton cupped her face in his hands. "Yes, more than anything. But I cannot ask you to share a life of poverty and uncertainty." "You do not get to decide what I can handle," Fiona said firmly. "I have hauled water across the desert every day for weeks. I have planted flowers in sand and watched them bloom. I have survived losing everyone I ever loved. Do not tell me I cannot handle being married to you just because times are hard. Fiona, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You are the one being cowardly." Dalton looked stung. "Cowardly?" "Yes. You are ready to run at the first sign of trouble instead of fighting for what we have." Fiona felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. "I thought you were braver than that. And I thought you would understand that a man needs to be able to provide for his family." Dalton shot back, his own frustration rising. "I do not need you to provide everything. I need you to stay and build a life with me. We can figure out the rest together." Fiona grabbed his shirt. "Please, Dalton, do not give up on us before we even have a chance." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Pride versus love, fear versus hope. Finally, he pulled her close again. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, you know that. Does that mean you will stay?" "It means I will try." He kissed the top of her head. "But I need to find work, Fiona. I will not let you support us both." "Then we will find you work. Trinity needs a lot of things. We just have to figure out what." They walked back to town together as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of pink and orange. Fiona's mind raced, trying to think of possibilities. What did Trinity need? What could Dalton do besides ranch work? The answer came to her 3 days later when she was serving dinner at the boarding house. One of the guests, a merchant passing through on his way to California, was complaining about the condition of his wagon. "The wheel is near about to fall off," he grumbled. "But there is no decent wheelwright in this town. I am going to have to nurse it all the way to the next settlement and hope it holds." Fiona's head snapped up. "Mr. Quinn is good with his hands. He might be able to fix it." "The cowboy you have been seeing, Mrs. Chen asked, setting down a platter of roasted chicken. "He is good at fixing things around the ranch. I bet he could repair a wagon wheel." The merchant looked skeptical. "I need someone who knows what they are doing, not some ranch hand playing at carpentry." "Give him a chance," Fiona pressed. "What do you have to lose?" As it turned out, Dalton could fix the wagon wheel. He had learned basic carpentry from his father and had repaired countless things around the Double R over the years. The merchant was so impressed, he paid him double what Fiona had quoted and told him if he ever set up shop properly, he would spread the word along his route. That evening, Dalton found Fiona in her garden, now in full bloom. He lifted her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "You brilliant woman! You might have just saved us." "Saved us how?" "I talked to Mr. Jameson at the general store. He said if I can do carpentry and basic blacksmithing, he knows of at least a dozen people who need work done. Trinity has not had a dedicated smith or carpenter in over a year. The last one moved to Phoenix." Dalton set her down but kept his arms around her. "I could make this work, Fiona. It would not be easy at first, and I would need to build up my reputation, but I could make a living right here in Trinity." "You would not have to leave," Fiona breathed. "I would not have to leave." He dropped to one knee right there in the garden, among the flowers they had grown together. "Fiona Barrett, I know I do not have much to offer yet. No land, no established business, just a lot of hope in these two hands. But I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this world. You have shown me that beautiful things can grow even in the hardest places. Will you marry me? Will you help me build a life here together?" Fiona's tears finally fell, but they were tears of joy. "Yes. Yes, of course I will marry you." He stood and kissed her, deep and passionate, and Fiona felt like her heart might burst from happiness. Around them, her flowers bloomed, bright and defiant in the desert heat, proof that impossible things could happen with enough faith and work and love. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Trinity. Mrs. Chen stood up as Fiona's witness, and Mr. Richardson, who had stayed on to help with the ranch transition, served as Dalton's. Fiona wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, and Dalton wore his best shirt and a new string tie. It was not fancy, but as they spoke their vows in front of the traveling preacher who passed through town once a month, Fiona felt like the richest woman in the world. "I promise to water your dreams the way we watered those flowers," Dalton said when it was his turn for personal vows. "To stand by you in sun and storm. To build a life with you that blooms even in the hardest seasons." Fiona could barely speak through her tears. "I promise to believe in us even when things seem impossible. To dig deep when the ground is hard. To create beauty with you wherever we are planted." When the preacher pronounced them married, Dalton kissed her to applause from the small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness the wedding. Mrs. Chen had organized a small celebration at the boarding house, and the whole town seemed to turn out to wish them well. "You two give an old woman hope," Mrs. Chen said, embracing Fiona. "In this hard land, we need reminders that love can survive." Dalton rented a small workshop space on the edge of town and began taking carpentry and blacksmithing jobs. True to his word, the merchant spread the word along his route, and soon Dalton had more work than he could handle. He was talented and fair-priced, and in a town desperate for skilled labor, he quickly became essential. Fiona continued tending her desert garden, which had become something of a local attraction. People would bring their children out to see the flowers, marveling at the impossible bloom. Some even began asking her for advice on growing their own plants, and she found herself teaching impromptu lessons on soil preparation, watering schedules, and seed selection. "You should charge for your knowledge," Dalton said one evening as they sat in the small house they had rented on the edge of town. It was just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs, and Fiona had never been happier. Charge people for helping them grow things. Fiona looked up from the sock she was mending. "That seems wrong. You are providing a valuable service. There is no shame in being compensated for it." He came over and knelt beside her chair. "You could teach regular classes, maybe even start selling seeds and seedlings. There are people who want to grow things but do not know how." The idea took root in Fiona's mind. Within a month, she had started offering weekly gardening lessons, and the response was overwhelming. Women came from all over the area, desperate to add some beauty and fresh food to their hard lives. Fiona taught them everything her mother had taught her, and together, they began transforming Trinity from a dusty desert town into a place where flowers bloomed in window boxes and vegetables grew in carefully tended plots. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. They fell into bed exhausted each night, but always took time to hold each other, to talk about their days, to make plans for the future. Dalton's business grew to the point where he had to hire an apprentice, a young man named Thomas who was eager to learn. Fiona's classes became so popular that Mrs. Chen suggested she write her lessons down in a book that could be sold. "A book?" Fiona laughed. "Who would buy a book written by me?" "Everyone who wants to know how to grow flowers in the desert," Mrs. Chen said practically. "You have knowledge that is valuable. Do not waste it." On their first anniversary, Dalton took Fiona back to the spot where her original garden still bloomed. He had continued bringing water to it even as their lives got busier, and the flowers returned year after year, their seeds spreading to create an ever larger patch of color in the barren landscape. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. Inside was a deed. Fiona read it in confusion, then looked up at him with wide eyes. "You bought this land." 10 acres, including your garden," Dalton smiled. "It is not much, but it is ours. I thought maybe we could build a house here someday, raise our family surrounded by flowers." Fiona threw her arms around him, knocking them both into the sand. She kissed him soundly, and he laughed against her mouth. "I will take that as a yes. It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect." "Far from it," Dalton said, but he was grinning. "But I am perfect for you, and that is enough." They made love right there in the garden, surrounded by the blooms they had created together, and Fiona felt more connected to him and to this land than she had ever felt to anything. This was home. This was where she was meant to be. 2 months later, Fiona realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had never thought much about children, had been too focused on survival, but now the idea of a baby, of Dalton's baby, made her heart swell. She told him that evening after dinner. Dalton had been bent over his account books, tallying up the week's earnings when she simply said, "We are going to need a bigger house." He looked up, confused. "What, for the baby?" She smiled tremulously. "I am pregnant, Dalton." He stood so fast his chair crashed over backward. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be." Mrs. Chen confirmed it. "She said I am about 2 months along." Dalton crossed to her in 3 long strides and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had in the garden all those months ago. "We are having a baby. Fiona, we are having a baby." His joy was infectious, and Fiona's fears melted away in the face of his excitement. They stayed up half the night making plans, talking about names and nurseries and what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to know they can do anything," Fiona said, her head resting on Dalton's chest as they lay in bed. That impossible things are just things that haven't been done yet. They will know, Dalton promised, his hand on her still flat stomach. How could they not, with you as their mother? The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat made Fiona sick, and she had to give up most of her gardening classes in the later months because she tired so easily. But Dalton was attentive and patient, taking over all the heavy work and insisting she rest. "You grew flowers in the desert," he would say when she protested. "Now you are growing a baby. Let me do the hauling and lifting." Their son was born in March of 1885 during a rare desert rainstorm. The labor was long and difficult, but when Fiona finally held the squalling, red-faced infant, she understood why people said that babies were miracles. He was perfect from his tiny fingers to his powerful lungs. "What should we name him?" Dalton asked, looking awed as he touched his son's cheek. Fiona thought of her father, of all the dreams he had never got to see realized. "Daniel, after my father." "Daniel Quinn," Dalton said, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world, son." Those early months were exhausting. Daniel was a hungry baby who woke frequently, and Fiona often felt like she was stumbling through her days in a fog of sleeplessness. But there was joy, too, in watching Dalton become a father, in seeing the gentleness with which he handled their tiny son, in the look of pure love on his face when he held the baby. When Daniel was 6 months old, they broke ground on a house on their land. It would take time to build, with Dalton doing most of the work himself in his spare time, but Fiona loved watching it take shape. She would sit in the shade with Daniel while Dalton hammered and sawed, and she would imagine their future in that house. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked during one of their building sessions, wiping sweat from his brow. "How far we have come," Fiona said, watching Daniel play with a wooden toy Dalton had made. "2 years ago I was on my knees in the dirt, and you were a cowboy who stopped to help a stranger. Now look at us." Dalton came over and kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, stopping that day. The best decision I ever made was letting you stay." The house was finished by the time Daniel turned 1 year old. It was simple but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms and a large main room that could serve as both kitchen and living space. But Fiona's favorite feature was the wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, perfect for sitting in the evening and watching the sun set over her garden. They moved in on a beautiful spring day, and that night they sat on their new porch with Daniel between them, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you," Fiona said softly. "For what?" "For watering my flowers. For believing in something impossible. For staying when you could have left." She took his hand. "For loving me." Dalton brought her hand to his lips. "You do not need to thank me for any of that. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dalton's carpentry business continued to thrive, and Fiona resumed her gardening classes once Daniel was old enough to sit happily in a basket while she taught. She also finally wrote down her lessons in a small booklet that sold surprisingly well, not just in Trinity but in surrounding towns. When Daniel was 3, Fiona found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter arrived in the autumn of 1888, born during a glorious sunset that painted the sky every shade of red and gold. "What about Margaret?" Dalton suggested, holding his tiny daughter with practiced ease. "After my mother." "Margaret Quinn," Fiona said, smiling. "Maggie for short. It is perfect." With 2 children, life became even busier. Daniel was a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing an interest in tools and building. Maggie was quieter, more thoughtful, and seemed to inherit Fiona's love of growing things. Before she could even walk properly, she would crawl to the garden and sit among the flowers, patting the petals with her chubby baby hands. "She has your spirit," Dalton observed one evening, watching Maggie try to dig in the dirt with a wooden spoon. "And Daniel has your determination," Fiona countered, nodding to where their son was attempting to hammer two pieces of wood together, his tongue stuck out in concentration. "God help us then," Dalton said, but he was laughing. The years passed in a blur of growing children, expanding gardens, and steady work. Dalton's business became the largest carpentry and blacksmithing operation in Trinity, and he employed 3 full-time workers. Fiona's desert garden had grown to cover nearly 3 of their 10 acres, and she had started a small nursery business selling seedlings and seeds throughout Arizona territory. Trinity itself was growing too. The railroad had brought new people and new opportunities, and the dusty outpost Fiona had arrived at 7 years ago was now a proper town with a school, a real doctor, and plans for a public library. Fiona and Dalton were considered pillars of the community, the couple who had proven that with enough determination and hard work, anything was possible. But success had not changed them. They still worked hard, still valued the simple things, still took time each evening to sit on their porch and watch the sunset. Dalton still brought water to the original garden plot, maintaining it even though they now had a proper irrigation system for the larger operation. It was a ritual, a reminder of how they had started. "Do you ever regret it?" Fiona asked him one evening in 1890. They were sitting on the porch while Daniel, now 5, and Maggie, almost 2, played in the yard. "Giving up ranch work. I know you loved it." Dalton considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the riding, the open range, but I would not trade what we have built for anything. This life, with you and the children and our land. This is better than anything I imagined back when I was working at the Double R." "I am glad you stopped that day," Fiona said. "When you saw me planting flowers, so am I." He pulled her close. "You know what I think about sometimes? How easily we could have missed each other. If I had ridden a different route, if you had picked a different spot to plant, if I had decided not to stop. One small change and we never would have met." "But we did meet," Fiona said firmly, "and I do not believe in coincidence. I think we were meant to find each other." In 1892, Fiona published a proper book about desert gardening, written with the help of a teacher from the Trinity School who edited her work. It sold throughout the territory and even got reviewed in a Phoenix newspaper. The reviewer called it an essential guide for anyone attempting to bring life to Arizona's harsh landscape, and praised Fiona's practical advice delivered with warmth and wisdom. The book's success led to speaking engagements, and Fiona found herself traveling to nearby towns to give lectures on desert agriculture. Dalton was endlessly proud, showing everyone who came into his shop the reviews and telling anyone who would listen about his brilliant wife. Their children grew. Daniel started school and excelled, showing aptitude in mathematics and engineering. Maggie followed 2 years later, and her teachers immediately noticed her gift for art, the way she could capture the beauty of desert flowers with just a pencil and paper. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Fiona back to the original garden plot. The flowers were in full bloom, even more spectacular than in earlier years. The seeds had spread far beyond the original area Fiona had planted, creating a carpet of color that could be seen from a mile away. 10 years, Dalton said, his arm around her waist. "Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday," Fiona said. "Other days it feels like we have always been together. I have something for you." He pulled out a small box. Inside was a a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "I could not afford a proper ring when we got married," Dalton said. "But I have been saving up and I wanted you to have this. It is not much, but—" Fiona kissed him, stopping his words. "It is perfect. You are perfect." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she held up her hand, watching the diamond catch the light. But what made her cry was not the ring itself, but what it represented. 10 years of partnership, of building something beautiful together, of love that had not just survived but thrived. "I love you, Fiona Quinn," Dalton said. "More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "That is very poetic for a cowboy," Fiona teased through her tears. "I learned from the best," he said, echoing her words from so long ago. Life continued its steady forward march. In 1895, when Daniel was 10 and Maggie 7, Fiona became pregnant again. This pregnancy was unexpected, and at 34 she worried she was too old. But the baby, another boy they named Thomas after Dalton's oldest brother, arrived healthy and vigorous. With 3 children, their house felt suddenly small, so they added on 2 more bedrooms. Daniel helped his father with the construction, now old enough to be genuinely useful, and Fiona felt a surge of pride watching her son work alongside his father, the two of them in perfect sync. Thomas was an easy baby, content to watch his older siblings play. Maggie, in particular, doted on him, treating him like her personal doll. She would push him around in a small wagon Dalton had built, telling him elaborate stories about the flowers in the garden and the adventures they had when no one was watching. The turn of the century found the Quinn family happy and prosperous. Dalton's business was so successful he had to turn away work. Fiona's nursery operation provided a steady income and had gained her a reputation throughout the territory. Daniel, now 15, was planning to attend university to study engineering. Maggie, 12, had won several art competitions. And Thomas, at 5, was showing signs of inheriting both his father's mechanical aptitude and his mother's love of growing things. But success had not made them complacent. They still worked hard, still valued each day together, still maintained the rituals that had become the foundation of their life. Every evening, if they were both home, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset. Every week, they took the children to see the original garden plot, teaching them the story of how their parents had met and fallen in love. "Tell us again about the flowers, Mama," Thomas would beg, never tiring of the story. And Fiona would tell it, about coming to Trinity with nothing, about planting seeds in impossible soil, about a cowboy who had stopped to help and had watered not just her flowers but her heart. In 1903, Daniel left for university in California. It was hard to watch him go, this boy who had made her a mother, but Fiona was proud of the man he was becoming. He wrote home faithfully every week, telling them about his studies and his dreams of building bridges and buildings that would last for generations. Maggie, meanwhile, was developing into a talented artist. At 16, she had already sold several paintings to wealthy families in Phoenix and was talking about studying art in San Francisco. She had inherited her mother's determination and her father's work ethic, spending hours capturing the desert's beauty on canvas. Thomas, at 8, was splitting his time between helping his father in the workshop and helping his mother in the garden. He had a natural gift for understanding how things worked, whether mechanical or botanical, and both parents delighted in nurturing his curiosity. "He is going to do something amazing," Dalton predicted one evening, watching Thomas carefully transplant seedlings. "I can feel it." "They are all going to do amazing things," Fiona corrected. "We raised them to believe they could." On their 20th anniversary in 1904, the town of Trinity threw them a celebration. What had started as a small dinner had grown into a full town party, with people coming from all over to honor the couple who had helped transform Trinity from a dusty outpost into a thriving community. The mayor gave a speech about how the Quinns embodied the spirit of the West: hard work, determination, and the courage to try impossible things. Fiona's original garden plot was officially designated a town landmark, with a small plaque that read, "Where Fiona Barrett planted flowers in the desert, and Dalton Quinn watered them and watched her bloom too. May we all have the courage to grow beauty in hard places." Fiona cried when she read the plaque, and Dalton held her close while the whole town applauded. It was overwhelming, being recognized for simply living their lives and loving each other, but it was also deeply moving. "We did it," Fiona whispered to Dalton as they danced at the celebration. "We built something that mattered." "You did it," Dalton corrected. "I just brought the water." "No," Fiona said firmly. "We did it together. That is the whole point. Neither of us could have done any of this alone." The years continued to roll by. Daniel graduated from university with honors and got a job with a prestigious engineering firm in Los Angeles. He came home twice a year, always bringing gifts and stories of his work. Maggie went to art school in San Francisco and had her first gallery showing at 19. Thomas followed his brother to university at 18, studying agricultural science with the goal of developing new techniques for desert farming. Dalton and Fiona, now in their 40s, found themselves with an empty nest for the first time since early in their marriage. It was strange at first, rattling around in a house that had always been full of noise and activity, but they adapted, rediscovering the quiet joy of each other's company. "You remember when we were first married?" Fiona asked one evening. They were sitting in their original spot in the garden now so many years later. "When it was just the two of us," vaguely, Dalton teased. "That was a long time ago, 23 years. Fiona shook her head in wonder. "Where did the time go?" "Into building a life," Dalton said. "Into raising children, into growing these gardens and running businesses and making a home." He took her hand. "Into loving you." "Always the poet," Fiona said, but her eyes were soft. In 1908, Daniel got married to a school teacher he had met in California, and the whole family traveled west for the wedding. It was Fiona's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the vastness of it. "It is beautiful," she said to Dalton. "But I prefer the desert." "So do I," he agreed. "The desert is honest. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is." Daniel and his wife, Caroline, settled in Los Angeles, and a year later they had a baby girl. Becoming grandparents was a joy Fiona had not expected to feel so intensely. Holding her granddaughter, seeing Dalton's features in the baby's face, made her heart ache with happiness. Maggie married a fellow artist in 1910, a gentle man named Peter who adored her. They settled in Santa Fe, where the light was perfect for painting, and soon presented Fiona and Dalton with twin grandsons. Fiona laughed when she heard the news, remembering how she had once been overwhelmed by one baby. Her daughter would be managing two from the start. Thomas, following in his parents' footsteps, fell in love with a girl from Trinity. Sarah was the daughter of Mrs. Chen, who was now in her 70s and still running the boarding house with remarkable energy. Thomas and Sarah married in 1912 in a ceremony held in Fiona's garden, surrounded by flowers and family and friends. They built a house on the Quinn land, and Thomas started implementing his new agricultural techniques. His work increased crop yields dramatically, and soon farmers from all over Arizona were coming to learn from him. Like his mother before him, He started teaching classes and writing about his methods. "He is continuing what you started," Dalton observed, watching Thomas lead a group of farmers through an experimental field, "making the desert bloom." "We all continue what someone else started," Fiona said. "That is how progress works." The years that followed brought more grandchildren, more success, and more love than Fiona had ever dreamed possible. Her original garden plot, now carefully maintained by the town, had become a symbol of Trinity itself, proof that beauty and life could flourish even in the hardest conditions. Fiona's nursery business was now run mostly by Thomas and Sarah, with Fiona serving as a consultant and teacher. Dalton had finally retired from daily carpentry work, though he still kept a small workshop where he made toys for his growing brood of grandchildren. On their 40th anniversary in 1924, the entire family gathered in Trinity. Daniel came from California with Caroline and their 3 children. Maggie arrived from Santa Fe with Peter and their twins, now teenagers. Thomas and Sarah hosted everyone, their own 4 children running wild with their cousins. The celebration was held in the original garden, now achingly beautiful after decades of care. Fiona and Dalton stood together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, and Fiona felt like her heart might burst. "Look at what we made," she said to Dalton, gesturing at the assembled crowd. "Look at this family, this life." Dalton pulled her close. "I stopped to help you water some flowers. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Fiona corrected. She turned to face him, this man who had loved her so faithfully for 40 years. His hair was gray now, and his face showed the weathering of decades in the desert sun, but his eyes were the same, still looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. 40 more years, she asked. 40 more years, he promised, and all the years after that. They kissed while their family applauded, and someone, probably Maggie, said something about how her parents were never going to stop being disgustingly romantic. Fiona laughed against Dalton's mouth, feeling young and vibrant despite her 63 years. The party continued into the evening, with food and music and dancing. The grandchildren played among the flowers while the adults talked and laughed. When the sun finally set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange, everyone paused to watch, as if paying homage to the beauty that surrounded them. Later, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed, Fiona and Dalton sat alone on their porch, holding hands in the darkness. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Fiona asked. "When you found me planting, I said you were going to need water," Dalton recalled. "Lots of it. You brought me water," Fiona said softly. "Every day without fail, even when it was hard, even when you had other things to do. You brought me water and you watched me bloom." "We bloomed together," Dalton said. "You were already beautiful, Fiona, already strong. I just helped give you the conditions you needed to show the world what I already saw." Fiona turned to look at him. "I love you, Dalton Quinn. I have loved you since the second time you brought water, and I will love you until I take my last breath and beyond." "The second time," Dalton's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Not the first time I was suspicious," Fiona admitted. "The second time I was smitten." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the desert night, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out. The air smelled of flowers and dust, and all the years they had spent together, and Fiona thought there was no perfume in the world that could compare. Life continued its steady march. There were challenges, of course. Droughts that tested even Thomas's innovative farming techniques. The Great Depression that strained businesses and families across the country. Health scares and worries and all the normal struggles of life. But through it all, Fiona and Dalton faced everything together, just as they always had. They grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. Dalton's limp became more pronounced, and Fiona developed arthritis that made gardening painful, but they adapted. They hired young people to do the physical work while they supervised and taught, passing on their knowledge to another generation. On their 50th anniversary in 1934, the family gathered again. This time there were great-grandchildren running through the garden, Daniel's daughter having married and had babies of her own. The original flowering plants had seeded themselves across an even larger area, creating a natural garden that stretched for acres. The celebration was quieter than the 40th anniversary party, more intimate. Fiona and Dalton were both 73 now, content to sit and watch rather than dance. But their happiness was undiminished, their love still as vibrant as those first blooms had been. 50 years, Fiona marveled. Half a century. Best 50 years of my life, Dalton said. His voice was raspier now, weathered by age but still strong. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They made us stronger. Made us appreciate the good even more. That night, after everyone had settled down, Fiona and Dalton lay in their bed, holding each other in the darkness. They had shared this bed for 50 years, through passion and illness, joy and sorrow, and countless quiet moments just like this one. "Are you happy?" Dalton asked, his fingers running through her white hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Fiona answered honestly. "You know what I think about sometimes? That girl who came to Trinity with nothing but a bag of seeds and a lot of hope. I wish I could tell her that everything was going to be okay, better than okay, that she was going to find love and build a family and create something beautiful that would last long after she was gone. She would not have believed you," Dalton said with a smile in his voice. "Probably not. She was pretty stubborn. She still is." Fiona laughed, then turned to kiss him. "I love you, Cowboy. I love you too, my desert flower." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, just as they had for 50 years, and the garden outside continued to bloom under the endless Arizona sky. The final years of their lives were peaceful. They spent their days surrounded by family, tending their garden when they could, and simply enjoying each other's company. Dalton passed away in 1937 at the age of 76, dying peacefully in his sleep with Fiona beside him. She woke to find him gone, and though her heart broke, she knew he had lived a full and happy life. At his funeral, which seemed to bring out the entire town of Trinity and beyond, Fiona stood and spoke about the man she had loved for 54 years. "Dalton Quinn was a cowboy who stopped to help a stranger," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He brought water to impossible dreams. He built a life with his hands and his heart. He loved fiercely and faithfully. And he taught everyone who knew him that kindness and hard work can create miracles." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "I planted flowers in the desert, and he watered them, but what bloomed was not just a garden. It was a life, a family, a legacy of love that will continue long after we are gone." Fiona lived another 5 years after Dalton's death. She stayed in their house, tended by her children and grandchildren, and spent her days in the garden they had created together. She wrote a final book, a memoir about her life and love, that became a bestseller. The proceeds from it funded a scholarship for young people studying agriculture or horticulture, ensuring that the work she and Dalton had started would continue. She passed away in 1942 at the age of 81, surrounded by family, her hand reaching out as if to grasp someone only she could see. Her last words were, "I am coming, Dalton. Keep the water ready." They buried her beside him in the Trinity Cemetery under a shared headstone that read, "Fiona and Dalton Quinn." She planted flowers in the desert. He watered them and watched her bloom. Together, they created a garden that will flourish forever. But their story did not end there. The garden they had started continued to thrive, maintained now by the town and visited by thousands of people every year. It became a symbol of hope and persistence, proof that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. Thomas and Sarah continued the nursery business, and their children carried it into the next generation. Daniel's engineering firm designed buildings throughout California that still stand today. Maggie's paintings hang in museums, capturing the desert beauty her mother loved so much. The family grew and spread, but they all came back to Trinity regularly, to the house Dalton built and the garden Fiona planted. And on quiet desert evenings, when the sun sets in brilliant colors and the flowers bloom despite the harsh conditions, people still tell the story of Fiona and Dalton Quinn, of a woman who dared to plant beauty in impossible soil, and a cowboy who brought her water and watched her bloom, of a love that started with an act of kindness and grew into something that changed not just two lives but an entire community. The flowers still bloom in that desert garden, year after year after year, fed by the spring Dalton found, and the love Fiona and Dalton planted along with those first seeds. And if you visit on the right evening, when the light is soft and the air is cooling, you might swear you can see two figures sitting on the porch of the old Quinn house, holding hands and watching the sunset, still together after all these years. Because some love stories do not end. They just keep blooming, generation after generation, proof that impossible things happen every day if you have enough faith, enough courage, and someone willing to help you water your dreams. The Quinn family still gathers in Trinity every year for a reunion, held in the garden where it all began. Children run through the flowers, while their parents tell the story of great-great-grandmother Fiona and great-great-grandfather Dalton, keeping the memory alive. And every time the story is told, it inspires someone new to plant their own impossible garden, to believe that beauty can grow anywhere if you are willing to do the work. That is the true legacy of Fiona and Dalton Quinn. Not just the garden they created or the businesses they built or even the family they raised, but the idea they embodied. That love, like desert flowers, can bloom in the harshest conditions. That kindness can change lives. That helping someone else's dreams grow waters your own soul. That two people, working together with faith and determination, can create something beautiful that will last long after they are gone. And so the flowers continue to bloom in the Arizona desert, bright and defiant and beautiful, a testament to a love story that started with a bag of seeds and a cowboy's kindness, and grew into something extraordinary. In Trinity, they still say that if you want to know what true love looks like, just visit the Quinn garden. See the flowers that should not be able to grow but do anyway. See the legacy of two people who built a life together, one bucket of water at a time. See proof that miracles happen every day, as long as you are brave enough to plant the seeds.